Hello and welcome to August of Harbour for May. It is currently the 23rd. I'm recording this a little bit early because I know there is one book in this that is going to be very long, and by the time I finish it, I will have forgotten everything else I've read this month. So, we're talking about these five and also two more that I've read online. Starting with Rule of Cool, Convenience Store Woman is a book that really did the rounds a few years ago. This is by Sayaka Murata. It is about a young woman who works in a convenience store in Japan. The kind of iconic store that I think is very emblematic of Japanese society nowadays is that when people travel to Japan, or I guess from Japan, it's such a mainstay. They're really everywhere. And it's the kind of person or character that I think tends to get overlooked in society. And this book knows it. This book is really very much about the kinds of people in society who have complex and very unusual interior lives that work jobs that most people, broadly speaking, kind of take for granted. And so we have this narrator who is very strange. She is someone who I don't mean strange as like a human being, right? I mean strange as in her society doesn't see her as ordinary. Her society sees her as a bit abnormal. She's someone that kind of has to learn social cues by observing other people and performing exactly what they do, but she herself doesn't really have this internal balance of what is normal or what is regular behavior. She's just kind of acting as people around her do. And that's what draws her to this convenience store, is that all forms of interaction and behavior are so regimented. They have this manual at their training events where they very clearly say, here is how you act, here is how you speak, here's how you behave. And so she, of course, loves this. She loves being able to have a purpose and to be so clearly explained what works well and what doesn't, how you should behave yourself in the store. And this sort of puts her at odds with her co-workers and the people in the store. She eventually, and this is the core plot, is that she meets this young man who starts working at this store who is also detached from society, but in a slightly different way. And this is interesting because Japanese society, from what I understand from this book and also just broader pop culture knowledge, is that it is very high context and very much people have expectations about what your behavior will be that are sort of ingrained to you. You either glean that from the way people treat you, or you're taught that from a very young age by your parents in very private environments. And so most people have this orthodox view of life. You go to work, you earn a salary, you start a family, you meet someone that is of a similar kind of social standing to you. And I relate to this a little bit as a Chinese man because I feel like Chinese society, or at least the way I was growing up, is quite similar. Like, you do get a sense that if you don't meet certain milestones or behave in certain ways in certain situations, then you stand out and you look weird and you look kind of unusual. And that's what this protagonist is having trouble with, is that her family is encouraging her to start a family, to work a job that's not at a convenience store, to behave in certain ways, to think in certain ways, and she really butts up against this. I think the story is told pretty well. It is really, really quick. I read this at the library, and I read this in about 50 minutes. It doesn't waste any time, but it's also, it doesn't elaborate, it doesn't romanticize, and you get this voice of the character very clearly. You see the world through her eyes because she doesn't romanticize anything. And even the tremendously strange things that she does to, especially her male coworker, I don't know how we're positioned to view this. I feel like this novel is making a quite interesting political statement about the people in society that don't fit into categories, that don't really align with these unspoken expectations of what human lives are like. And I think it's trying to make quite an empathetic argument, like we should see their experiences as valid and they can enjoy life just very differently to most people do. But at the same time, I feel like the way this first-person narrator is written makes the reader more aware of their normality and makes them want to laugh at her more. And I don't know how I feel about that. It's a very similar feeling I get with Eleanor Oliphant's Completely Fine and lots of other kind of aberrant narrator novels. My Year of Rest and Relaxation. There's a sense that there's a normality and that the reader is normal and the narrator is not normal. And this relationship between us as readers and the people in society that these novels purport to be giving empathy to, but are also in some sense making a judgment on. I haven't really untangled this. I don't know how I feel about it. And I think it's very easy to kind of read and enjoy this book and put it down and forget about it. I don't think it really changes my attitude towards convenience store workers or or service economies at all, really. And I mean, I say this as someone who worked in hospitality and as retail, and I would like to hope that I had a very complex internal life when I did that. I would like to see the humanity of characters more, and I think the character that's given here, this protagonist, is just such a specific and such a distant figure that whilst I can see her existing, I don't know how reading this novel kind of changes or influences my life. But it is a cool read. It is something that will be discussed. I feel like I might have quite frustrating discussions with people about this book, and if they really, really love it, and if they say, like, it makes me think more deeply about people who work in service roles. My thought is, well, really? Like, does it? Anyways, it's a 3 out of 5. My second book of this month, IQ 84 by Haruki Murakami, is enormous. It is 1,100 something pages. It is really 3 novels that in the international release get bundled into one, and gosh, you need to read it as one novel. The 3 novels themselves are very unsatisfying by themselves. They create this consistent narrative that isn't concerned about having a proper narrative arc individually in a novel. The narrative arc happens across all 3 books taped together. So this, I would say, is the right way to read this if you intend to read this, but I do not recommend this book. This is a book that I really, really didn't enjoy. What I think is interesting about Murakami is that his writing style for me is just some of the most inoffensive writing style I've ever seen. Like, I can read it so quickly. It achieves that magic sensation where you forget you're reading a book, you forget you're processing language, and instead it just flows straight through your brain. I think it's a fantastic work, both on the efforts of the writer and the translator. This book actually has 2 translators, I think, for different novels. It works well. It's a writing style that is really clean and easy to follow, and it does have a very compulsive quest narrative. So the way this book works is that there's 2 main characters. There's Almame, who is this young girl, There's Almame, who is this young woman who is sort of an assassin. Like, one of the first things she does is kill someone by stabbing the back of their neck with a needle, and as this progresses, we find out that she's someone that's crossed over into this strange other world called IQ84, which is a parallel of 1984. Not the book, but the actual year 1984. Is that things are strange in IQ84. There's 2 moons. There's other mysteries going on. I don't know how much I should talk about, because there are core mysteries that unfold as the story goes along. And that's kind of the only enjoyable thing about this book, is we're interested in what these mysteries are, and we're interested in what the significance of each of these things is. So Almame is one character, Tengo's the other character. He also finds himself in IQ84. He's sort of a literary judge for a festival, and what he ends up doing is his editor, Komatsu, tells him that there is this young 17-year-old girl named Fuka Eri. She is an author of a strange fantasy work called Air Chrysalis. And Tengo's job is to sort of edit Air Chrysalis in a way that would help it win this prize, because people are really enamored by the story of Air Chrysalis, but they don't like the actual writing style. And so Tengo starts to write this fantastical story about little people that creates this cocoon called an Air Chrysalis. And as this is happening, he realizes he's written a story about a world with 2 moons, and then he finds himself sort of in that world with 2 moons. Tengo also has a strange sexual experience where his first memory is his mum in a sexual act with a man who wasn't his father. He's got a kind of broken family dynamic. And he's also connected to Almame in a way where when they were in primary school, Almame, who was raised in a splinter Christian sect, was really ostracized from the rest of the class, and she runs up to Tengo and then she holds his hand and they have this like romantic bond or whatever. It sounds complicated, and it is. It's paranoid fiction. It's fiction where characters are kind of interconnected. There's conspiracies and cults and strange beliefs and fantastical things. And that can be enjoyable. And I do kind of like paranoid fiction sometimes. I really enjoyed the reading experience of something like Gravity's Rainbow, where you're trying to find out how the characters are connected to one another. And that complexity can be very pleasant. This one, though, so what I should have expected about Murakami, and this is what I was getting towards earlier, is that I've read a few of his novels now, and I know for a fact he does not like a definitive ending, and he does not like tying together loose ends. He is someone who, I guess from his philosophy, from the books that I've read of him, he is someone that believes in the randomness of the universe and in the fact that there are so many things around us that will just never be explained, that we won't know the big picture, and we should be glad or grateful for whatever kind of truth that we can, for the briefest moment, understand. And so for that, IQ84 has so many unresolved mysteries and plots. It's got so many things that make you go, that's weird and fascinating and I want to know more, and it just will not give you any more. That makes me dislike it. And then we get to the weird sex stuff. So this book has just a huge amount of strange sex scenes, and some of them, there's one that kind of occurs midway through the book, which was so unpleasant and grotesque to me that it made me want to stop reading the book entirely, because I thought to myself, like, I can't recommend anyone this book in good conscience knowing that this happens in there. And I don't trust this author or the way this book has been going so far to think that there will be a proper narrative or thematic justification for including a scene like that in this book. But I kept reading to wonder, like, will there be something? And also because at that point I was 500 pages in and it was a sunk cost, and it's still pretty compulsive writing. And it's just a letdown. It's so much longer than it needs to be. I feel like the Murakami works that I like the most are the ones that kind of cap out around 300 pages or 400 pages that have this straightforward or enjoyable romp that does reach some kind of conclusion that doesn't keep the reader strung along the entire time. Whereas this book is just a string. It's just there to string you on for as long as it can possibly do it. And it has this silly justification of the world of IQ84 where they can just go, things don't have to make sense because this isn't the real world. Woo! Like, I'm so disappointed. And I think the pairing of those two things, I don't give out a lot of I don't give out a lot of 1-star reviews, but I would say this is a 1-star book for me. The amount of time it took for me, even though it was compulsive, even though it only took me about 10 days to read, but the amount of words of this book, coupled with the grotesqueness of some of the scenes, coupled with the kind of hollowness and emptiness where thematically it's not really about anything. Like, it's got topics, but it doesn't have themes. It's about, like, its topics are religion and belief and romance and men and women and revenge and conspiracies and cults, and there's lots of interesting topics. But thematically, like, what is it saying about each of those things? I think it's just a bit too mysterious to actually make a coherent statement about any of it. At least that's my interpretation. I see some people who love this book, I see some people who hate this book. I really do hate this book. I don't think there will be a situation where I could ever recommend this. I don't think I would know anybody who the themes and topics of this book aligns with that would make me go, oh, you should read this. Whereas I think sometimes with a 2 out of 5, I could say, I personally didn't like it and I wish I didn't read it, but there are redeeming things about it that might make it work for somebody who's not me. Whereas this book, I would have trouble imagining anybody who I could say, you should read this, you'll enjoy it, it's great. I really don't think that's true. And as much as I respect Murakami as an author, and I think that he has some very successful works in the past, and probably future, I think that the shortcomings of his style, which are all very well known, his treatment of women and his treatment of people in society, his kind of blasé emotionlessness and the lack of payoff sometimes, I think that is most egregious in this book, compounded by how long it is, and also even his strengths, like the compulsiveness of writing, I think here is let down a little bit just by how long it is. Like, I do feel like some passages and sentences and scenes don't feel that necessary. And it gets to a point where I think when a book surpasses 200,000 words, it's open season, you know? Like, you can just include whatever you want. No editor is going to say, you should cut that down because a 390,000 word work is better than a 400,000 word work. I just don't think that conversation ever happens. So, yeah, that's this book. I wanted to finish something much shorter immediately after with The Lover by Marguerite Duras is a book that I actually didn't know very much about, and I'm quite glad that I read. It is really short. This one's only about 100 pages, though I did need to read it more slowly because the way this book is written, you really kind of want to savor it. So premise-wise, we have this narrator who's a bit autofictive, a bit reflecting on the life of Duras herself. She is growing up in French-occupied Vietnam, and she is from a sort of poor family. Like, they are an ex-aristocratic family, and they are a colonial family. They do enjoy the colonial benefits of living in Vietnam, but they aren't generationally wealthy in a way that some aristocratic families are. And so they are concerned about where is their money going to come from and how are they going to pass it on, how are they going to ensure that the next generation gets to enjoy some sense of luxury. This results in the protagonist being quite distant from her mother, who is raising her in this very rigid style of behavior where she's lifting up the narrator to try and think of herself as higher or better than people around her. And the narrator is not having this. At the same time, the narrator is slowly coming of age in this environment. She's experimenting with friendships and relationships. She ends up in a relationship with a very rich Chinese man who's about 10 years older than her. And it's interesting because these two individuals, there's a very fantastic introduction in my edition by Maxine Hong Kingston, which looks at the Asian man as an object of romantic desire, but also this idea that both the Chinese and the French in Vietnam at the time were colonists. And they were colonists in different ways, French land and culture-wise and Chinese money-wise. But these two characters and the connection that they make sort of transcends their status as colonists. It's an argument that human relationship and emotion and love dwarfs our initial stereotyping of money and power and social standing. At least that's how I read it. And this leads to one of the most kind of physically painful emotional scenes I've read in fiction, where the Chinese man is meeting the family of this French girl. And the French family is, of course, racist. They're not going to take this Chinese man seriously. And yet they will exploit his money and his hospitality entirely. And it's just this very, very bitter scene where this man believes in love or believes in romance, believes in chasing after this person who he really desires, and finding out that it's impossible, and that impossibility is because of his skin. And there's this poignant moment right after that dinner scene where he goes to the narrator and he asks, what did I do wrong? Like, what could I have done there? Why did things go the way they did? But it's so clear, like, everyone here knows what the reason is. And it's one of those books that reminds me actually how painful racism can be, because I often forget that. I often forget that I am a Chinese person sometimes. I think I'm treated very, very well in Australia. Everyone is very, very kind to me and doesn't lead me into situations like this. But to be so vividly reminded of a situation where race does matter, and to see prejudices play out in this way, is such a powerful thing this book does. And it does show changing of societies and contrasting those ideas of emotion and loyalty and power and money. I think works really well. I think this is, to me, a very interesting and kind of Western spin on something like Love in a Fallen City, which is interested in the very similar themes, but the Chineseness of that is about leaving China, about leaving Asia, and living up to one's expectations about love and romance and power all around the world in this globalizing world. Whereas here in The Lover, it's constraining and compressing international influence into a very small domestic relationship coming of age situation. And I think it's very intelligently done. I love the way that it plays with time as well. It flows back and forth between present and future and past. It's a little bit wibbly, like it's not a straightforward timeline. The narrator will jump a little bit forward and back, but tell a coherent story. And so with that, we get really in touch with our narrator. We really start to understand the various forces that make her who she is and makes her act the way she does. I think it's a very well told story. I would give it 4 stars. I think I really enjoyed it, and I am going to remember it. It is quite short, and it isn't always the most accessible, but I do quite like it. Funnily, this book also fits nearly every one of my categories this year. It is part of the French canon. It does have 2-ish timelines. It does have love in the title. It is very cool, like it is stylish and simple. It ticks all the boxes. My loose end is Troilus and Cressida by William Shakespeare. This is the last tragedy of William Shakespeare that I have had to read. It's not good. I wish I could say much better than that, but it's a story about the Trojan War, except not that main Trojan War that everyone knows. We follow two characters, Troilus and Cressida, who didn't exist in Homer's telling or any telling that's ancient Greek of the story. In fact, it's a Renaissance, or I think just like an English myth that eventually got grandfathered into the story of the Trojan War. Troilus is I don't know if it's a prince or a warrior of Troy, and Cressida is a Greek woman who's part of the Trojan court at the moment, and they have a relationship, or mostly it's desire. It's very similar to me to something like Romeo and Juliet, this kind of forbidden love or love that wasn't meant to be, because Troilus and Cressida at first can't properly express their emotions for one another. We have other characters trying to push them together in funny situations, and then eventually around the middle of the play, when they do actually confess to one another, that's exactly the moment that Cressida is brought to the Greek camp as a kind of hostage exchange. And so because of that, Troilus wants Cressida's loyalty, and Cressida is tested by the various people in the Greek camp. We see a lot of the classical Greek soldiers like Odysseus and Ajax treating her really, really badly. And a lot of these Greek heroes are presented quite negatively. Like Odysseus, or Ulysses in this book, is just kind of a troll. Like he can see the whole picture, and he wants to put people in really silly situations for some reason. Like, I can't tell if it's for his own enjoyment or because he has some big plan that he wants to play, but he's not a good person. And he's not acting on any motivation other than really to sow chaos and to prove his intellect. We have Ajax, who is a very powerful soldier, but he is so unintelligent that his attitudes are played for a joke. And we have other Greek characters who are also there just to mess with people. And I like the Trojan War as a setting. I think it's very interesting. I really enjoyed my reading of the Iliad and the way that it really humanizes the individual soldier. It talks about masculinity, and it talks about what it means to achieve glory on the battlefield. And it helps me understand kind of attitudes towards masculinity in the past, and also how that carries forward to today. And Troilus and Cressida isn't really about that at all. There's very little fighting or very little discourse that happens. There's a lot of bragging, there's a lot of talking about who's the better fighter and what will happen if two people would fight. But it's not really about fighting. It's about romance and loyalty, sort of, and it does play into that whole Helen started the fight by leaving Menelaus and going to Paris, da-da-da-da. But it feels very negative against the women of the story. Like, Helen is often treated as this evil figure because she betrayed Menelaus or whatever. And Cressida, in the same sense, has her virtue tested because she's taken out of a romantic environment with Troilus, and in that distance, she's asked to demonstrate her loyalty. And in a play like this, like, I just don't know how I feel about it. I think that this kind of love being tested story has been told a lot of different times in Shakespearean tragedies, and I think it's done a lot better in Othello. And I don't even like Romeo and Juliet that much, but I think Romeo and Juliet does a better version of this. I think Cymbeline does a better version of this as well. I think the consequence of Troilus and Cressida is that I've read it last, and I know that it's not one of the plays that are the most famous. I wanted it to have something like a different angle that could make me enjoy it more, and I was hoping that the Trojan War angle would be the one that does it for me. And it's just not really that. Like, I feel like the characterization is not that great. The historical weight of it as well makes it harder for me to enjoy because I know these characters and I have a conception of what they should be like. And so seeing them being this silly and being this petty just doesn't really work for me. I do enjoy, though, that, I don't think this is true, but I just saw some random comment about it, that George Chapman did his translation of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Coincidentally, the copy that I have on my shelf, the one where the Iliad and the Odyssey are translated into Renaissance English, Shakespearean English. And Shakespeare, annoyed at how popular George Chapman's heroic translations were, wrote Troilus and Cressida, basically to make fun of that, to show everyone just infighting and a bunch of silly teenagers. That's the play that you're getting, is that it's not fun, it's tedious, it's 2 out of 5. Flesh by David Szalay is my Booker Prize winner for this month. It was the prize winner last year, 2025, and it's fine. It's funny, I was talking to somebody and saying, this is actually the second book I've read that has a cover of a man falling. And having since read this book, I went to a panel which was about representations of masculinity in fiction. And this book is one of those where it is very much about men and male issues. We follow a male protagonist who, as a child, is sexually frustrated and sexually abused, and that results in him carving this path of destruction in life. He starts out in Hungary and then goes to London, becomes very rich and successful, and results in very damaging relationships, both romantic and familial, across Europe, really. Like, there is a brief stint as well where he goes to war, and I thought that was really glossed over. He participates in the Iraq War, and he doesn't really talk very much about that, whereas I felt like that's probably something I would have been more interested in. Anyways, we have just a writing style that is so fast. I have a 20-minute train ride to work. I could read about 60 pages in those 20 minutes. It's so much faster than any other book I've ever read. And the reason is because I think a lot of the pages are like this. They are mostly dialogue, and the dialogue is mostly just a single line, because we have a protagonist who is very bad at expressing himself, and he ends up in empty and hollow conversations with most of the people around him. Like, when he's talking to women, he's just saying one-word answers, and when he's talking to other people in his life, he's just not articulate. He doesn't also have a very rich internal life. He's very simply motivated. He wants money, he wants power, he wants to have sex, and that's kind of it. He's not a bad person. He does do a lot of bad things, and we think about whether this makes him a tragic figure or makes him a figure that we should be afraid of or ridicule, and this novel, I don't really think, has a strong argument for that. It's a birth to death type story of a character who makes a lot of blunders and a lot of mistakes and acts out in quite extreme ways. And I think as a reader, this is what I think. As a reader, for me, I felt like I was being encouraged to look at myself and say, well, I'm not that far. I haven't done that. I wouldn't behave in that way. That's a step too far for me. And so it, in a way, is a bit comforting. Like, I can see myself in the ways that I am variously, if not frustrated, then at least not actualized in the way that I would want to be. But I'm not going to do the things that this narrator does. I'm not going to treat people as objects or as stepping stones in a way that he does. And I don't really know a lot of men in my life that do act like this, to be honest. Like, I feel like when I speak to my male friends, we are internally complex. We do talk about our emotions and feelings. And I think in the rare situation where I have an inkling that someone might be like this, our conversations haven't lasted very long, and I'm guessing it's because they're all just one-word answers. So, yeah, what do I feel of this book, right? It's well-written, it's compulsive, it's successful. I don't know how compelling of an argument it makes about masculinity, really, because I'm not sure I'm convinced about how many men in the world are actually like this at all. I guess it does make sense when we look at kind of the most awful people in our society, the ones that are actively driving society to ruin. Maybe internally they work like this, or maybe they don't. And I don't really know. I do think that this book is quite believable, and I was surprised at how little needed to be done in terms of plot and character and setting to be compelling. I think this book really, really, really strips away anything that's not necessary. I couldn't tell you what characters look like. I couldn't tell you what their voices sound like, what their homes are like, what their relationships are like. There's so little detail that's given. And I think that's really the experience of this book, is to look at it through our narrator's eyes and to strip away all meaning aside from what's important in the immediate moment. It's fine, it's interesting. I'm surprised that a book that's this stylistically extreme would win what I think to be quite a normalizing prize, the Booker Prize. But, I mean, it's interesting. I would give it a 3 out of 5. My first line game, Losing Face by George Haddad, is a book set in southwestern and then also central Sydney. The first line, which I was quite enamored by. Long ago, before factories, churches, cars, before the city of Bankstown, when Arabs were summoning spells in the sand, there lived a jinn that terrorized the desert. She tormented the mothers and children of the camps when the men were away, only when the men were away. I think, especially that first sentence, I really enjoy this melding between our current day and the very banal, very ordinary, and the fantastical, or at least historical, mythological, I thought that would be very interesting. And this isn't a very big book. The font, in classic Australian publishing fashion, is enormous. The book is enormous, bigger than my face, and it's not a very long book. It's only about 250 pages. I was really struck by how ordinary it was. So from that first line, I did think and hope and wish that it would blend elements of normality with fantastical things, and instead it's a book which really surprised me with just how true it feels, because, and I described this way when I was talking about it with my friends, is that I read the first 80 or so pages and nothing had happened. Like, I couldn't say that a third of the way into the book that the plot is this, or it's about this. Really, it's about Joey, our protagonist, who is half Lebanese and half white. His father is absent, and so he's being raised by his mother, and he's living with his brother. He's kind of existing in southwestern Sydney. He's working, he's going to music festivals, he's taking drugs with his friends, he's drinking, and all of that is like teetering on the edge of social acceptability. Like, to me, it's the kind of person where maybe it's not me and it's not my friends, but I can see someone living a life like this, and I do see it as a respectable life. Like, I don't judge people who live their lives this way. It honestly seems kind of fun, as long as you're not hurting anybody, right? And so when the plot does kick into gear, I see Joey, our protagonist, as just a very normal person, and he's someone that maybe I wouldn't know personally, but I might be 1 degree of separation from. And it makes me see the city of Sydney and the suburbs around me as much more populated, as much more bodied. That there are stories like this happening in each individual household. And these moments of friendship and coming of age and transgression and familial damage and repair, knowing oneself, they're happening all the time, and they're all very poignant. And I really love that it doesn't feel like a book that's written for that particular purpose. It doesn't feel pointed, it doesn't feel like it's trying to have a manifesto about it. Instead, it's just very ordinary. We kind of sit with these characters. We don't have events happening for the sake of drama or for the sake of pushing the plot along. And when those events do happen, they're still, to me, very much in service of the characters and very much showing us what people like this go through. I think it's really well done. I think that the various plot elements are handled really well. I love that there are this is gonna sound so weird after I said this about like IQ84. This book has a lot of loose ends, but I love it for that. I love that this book is interested in representing a reality, and it's not tied up in saying every event is here for a purpose. Because often in suburban lives, stuff just happens. People go to things, people get jobs and lose jobs, people meet people. Some of our influences are good and some of our influences are bad. We don't live in a surveillance state. The police don't know every single step of our everyday. And so everyone's going to have an incomplete picture of each other's lives. We're not going to see individuals as big, grand narratives. Instead, we're going to see individuals as a conglomerate of the various individual things that happen to them. And I think this book gets that and portrays that really well. IQ84, on the other hand, is a narrative, is a story that is teasing the reader with hints and mysteries and asking, you'll bet you want to know what happens next. So Losing Face doesn't have that compulsion about hiding information from the reader and giving it to you later. Instead, its loose ends are kind of to service the realism. Whereas IQ84 has no interest in realism. It instead brings up lots of literary theories like Chekhov's guns and of writing in service of realism and verisimilitude in order to draw attention to the fact that it's a story. And as I read IQ84 and I realize that it's been constructed, and I realize that its authorship is making decisions to include scenes or not include scenes for certain purposes, then that's what makes me dislike the loose ends. Whereas in Losing Face, it doesn't feel authored, it feels reported, it feels like this is just stuff that happens. And for what it's worth, I like that it's hopeful. I like that it's a bit vague about its protagonist. Like, its protagonist may or may not be queer, and it's not certain, and that's fine. I think because of all these things, this book feels more honest to me, and I would give it a I think I'm leaning towards giving it a 4 out of 5, specifically because I don't think it's exceptional, and it's intentionally not exceptional. I do think at times the dialogue doesn't feel... Or the thing that kicked me out of the belief was more often the dialogue than anything else. I did think at times the dialogue felt not like what these characters would say. That being said, I don't know for certain. But yeah, I would give it a 4 out of 5 just in the sense that it's not the biggest grand narrative that you're going to experience, and I think that's also fine. And last one for the month, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas is a pretty fun book. I was surprised at how quick the pacing was. I have an edition that's translated by Lord Sudley, which I've been told is not the best translated edition, but one of the strengths of it is that it's very easily readable. It was published in 1950, but even then, it was done in a way with the sentence structures are a bit simpler, and it respects the work as an action novel, which I think I enjoy it as such. I was saying to somebody earlier today that this is one of the most video gamey 1800s novels I've ever read. It's such a book where the characters, the heroes, kind of go to one place and fight some enemies, and then come up victorious, and then train, and then get new equipment, and then go to the next town and fight more enemies. It's set in the 1600s, and it's such a fascinating choice for this author to do, because it's a historical fiction novel written in the 1800s, set in the 1600s, at a time of conflict between the Catholics and Protestants in France, and also during the lead up to a rebellion in France where there was military conflict and there was machinations by the king, the cardinal, and representatives from England. And so the political intrigue here is actually pretty strong. I think the way that real historical figures are portrayed and the way that they kind of scheme and try to manipulate different social forces to get their way is interesting. And in the middle of all of this, we have D'Artagnan, who is the protagonist of the novel. He's not a musketeer. He's just this really hot-headed young dude. And he's been given this letter inviting him to, not audition, what's the word? Get a charge to be a musketeer. And so he's really excited, but he ends up fighting a bunch of people on the way. And he picks a fight with the title 3 characters of the Three Musketeers, Porthos, Athos, and Aramis. It's just a very funny introduction. I think it's just like such a TV show pilot or like a tutorial mission of a video game. It just introduces us to these characters really, really well in a really funny way, and we get a bit of intrigue into the backstories of these musketeers as well. I think the way the plot unfolds is really clever. There's just something thrilling and dramatic at every turn of the story. And I think ultimately the villain that gets revealed is a really good villain. Setting aside notions of morality and redemption and kind of the goodness of humanity, which is a theme that I really enjoy in fiction, if you were to give me a book that said, don't think about any of those things, here is just a really scary person, and they're going to be the adversary for the entire story, and you're going to wonder how our protagonist is going to overcome them. I think in this case, this book creates a very good villain. They're very manipulative and very entangled in the web of relationships in this novel, very good at getting their way. And so we think to... Also, one of my favorite character archetypes is dumbass protagonist. D'Artagnan has no clue what's going on. He is not good at the political machinations of the courts. He is just really good at sword fighting, and he's passionate, and he follows in his motions. And so we have young dumbass here fighting against this big web of political conspiracy. How is he going to sword his way through this with the loyalty of his friends, the Three Musketeers? It's just kind of fun, and there is a lot to be examined about what this book has to say about loyalty, specifically the way that people can be loyal to faiths and military commanders, to friends, to religious leaders, to romantic partners, and there are so many interesting moments where the faith of these characters and loyalty is tested in one way or the other, where characters are asked, who do you believe in more and why? And this novel is also so vocal about the various ways that Christianity can be manipulated into either supporting or dismantling political power. I just think it's very interesting, and yet these thematic concerns kind of go by the wayside because we're more interested in the action plot. And the action plot is fine. I do think it kind of fizzles out a little bit towards the end. I love the build-up, and the ending to me is... I have qualms, but I also don't really know how I would have wanted to end. I think it's just a necessary ending for a very adventurous and compelling text. I would give it a 4 out of 5. I think generally I enjoyed it. I was surprised at just how well, for such a long book, that narrative tension is maintained. I also really enjoy leaning into the ideas of French canon, that this book doesn't pull its punches in terms of its representations of relationship and sexual desire and violence, of sacrilege in some ways as well, of really questioning the authority of various figures, of kings, of dukes and earls, of religious figures, of cardinals, of soldiers. Really everything is kind of in flux here, and I think that's very fun. It creates this setting where you don't know who you can trust, and you build friendships and loyalties that last, because there's some real snakes out there, you know? I think it's just very fun. I enjoyed it immensely, but there are still qualms I have about it, and I mean, it's not a transcendent book, but it is one that I'm very glad to have read. Alright, those are the books of May. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you next month.